So, welcome to Satsang. So, as you know, if you have any questions, you are welcome to pose the question by speaking your question directly or by writing it in the chat box, which I think all of you are familiar with. Just a few words. The meeting in Satsang is meeting self to self. It is not a meeting of persons. It is not a meeting about our thoughts and our stories and our personal identities. There is an invitation in satsang and a recognition that our meeting is meeting of truth, meeting self to self, I. So I perceive you as what I am, meaning I perceive myself as your very self. And the invitation is to recognize the seamless quality, the borderless quality of being, of awareness, consciousness. So there is a dropping into being, dropping into the depth of presence, and in a way leaving behind the mind impressions so we can savor this meeting of oneness, this meeting where there are no others, just a meeting of being, meeting of truth, being God, being the self. It is in this very meeting of beingness that seeming issues, seeming personal issues, the movements of the mind and of the body rest, and in this resting they forget themselves, they're forgotten as they dissolve and are in a way resolved in pure being. It is not an activity of the mind. It is grace's doing, God's grace that is shining, dissolving the contractions, dissolving the impressions of limitations in the love, in the warmth of love, which is the grace of God. The senses may perceive via the conditioned mind and via the conceptual mind. They may perceive a person. But when you look with the correct eyes, with the true eyes, which are the eyes of being and not the eyes of the senses, not the body's eyes, but the eyes of consciousness, you do not perceive persons. You perceive your very self, seamless beingness, transparency of being. So there is an invitation in satsang to listen with your very being, not with your mind, not thinking about what you are hearing, but dying in a way into presence, allowing the wave, allowing the ocean, allowing the grace of being to reveal to you the very grace that you are. The qualities that we honor are universal qualities. We honor truth. We honor love. We honor beauty. We honor freedom and happiness. We honor the wisdom, God's wisdom. The qualities that we honor are not personal. They're universal. They have no opposite. Like the light does not know darkness. There is no opposite to light. In your journey, in your contemplation, you're invited to drop and release the idea that you are a student or that there is a teacher, and to recognize yourself your non-dual self, your infinite beingness that has no limitations to it. Consciousness has no limitation. It does not know such a thing as limitation. These are just downloads from that belief structure. It's a download of limitation, but consciousness is infinite transparency, the formless truth, the reality of your experience, the reality of I am. Everything that appears to us, thoughts, perceptions, sensations, dreams, feelings, they appear and they disappear. Consciousness is the reality of our experience that is beyond appearances and disappearances, beyond birth and death. That is why we refer to consciousness, to God, as the unborn. And sometimes awakening, we refer to it as the great death, dying to the impressions of birth and death, the impressions of birth and death. The death of such impressions reveals your eternity, your infinity, the reality of consciousness that has no beginning and no end. But when you define yourself via your thoughts and your feelings, you have already assumed yourself to be a limited entity, some kind of manifestation in time and space. And you fail to realize that it's mentation, it's just imagination. You're dreaming yourself to be a person, a man or a woman, or whatever, in time and space. That is not necessary. It's this form of limitation has quite an impact and spins the body mind in the turmoils. Hazel, I see your let me see. I'm not sure. Okay. All right. So let me look at your question, Ananda. So hello, Ananda. You're right, we have the types of love in Western philosophy: agape, philos, and eros. I'm beginning to wonder if there is much point to this conceptual division. The Valentine's Day mania puts emphasis on eros, and romantic love gets so much attention, but it only presents downstream under the broader heading of universal reality /love/being ? So, Amanda, there is a love that has no thought in it. There is love that has no mind, that has no mind in it. That the mind cannot define it, cannot dress it up or undress it, cannot say anything about it. There is a love that where the mind dies into that love. Where the entire me structure, the entire me and other are not functioning. They're not. And of course, there is all the love that the mind classifies as, which is thinking. It's thinking that is sort of inspired by true love, which has no thought.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in a way, you could say that via thought there is an attempt to capture thought, to capture love, which is uncapturable, into a thought, and create a conceptual experience, a conceptual form of that which is beyond concept. So love is one of the qualities, the divine qualities. It's absolute. And we are drawn to love. We are drawn to beauty. We're drawn to freedom. We're drawn to happiness. Because there are absolute qualities that we cannot separate ourselves from them. When we separate ourselves from them, we feel some incompleteness. We experience a lack. We experience a calling, a desire to get a fulfillment, to return to that absolute. But until we come upon the contemplation of the self, we are lost in the forest. We know that we need to find some clearing, that there is some beyond, there is a world beyond the forest. Mm-hmm. But we don't know the way, so we are wandering in the forest, lost. In the teaching, the Dharma is like the light in the tunnel, and you follow it. But it's not following the mind. It is not following thinking and trying to understand the absolute with the mind. You cannot understand love, but you can be it. Mm-hmm. And you are love in a recognition. There is a recognition of a wholeness, the recognition that the other is your very, very self. In your experience, you are never actually experiencing another. You're experiencing the other as yourself. There is an intimacy in experience that even defies the term intimacy. It's more intimate than intimacy. It's like water and wetness. Mm-hmm. So in that recognition, in the contemplation of your experience, when you are contemplating your experience, you are contemplating the reality of your experience. Mm-hmm. And not the content of your mind. Mm-hmm. The reality of your experience is one reality, because there aren't many realities. What would know many realities? There has to be one reality that would know that there are multiple realities. So it's one reality. Mm-hmm. In the contemplation of the reality of your experience, you're actually contemplating the reality of consciousness, not the reality of the appearances, because the appearances, they dissolve as they arise. Mm-hmm. So the reality of the appearances is beyond the appearances. It is the consciousness. Mm-hmm. And when you are contemplating the reality of your experience, meaning you're contemplating consciousness, you are simultaneously contemplating the qualities of consciousness, which are love, beauty, freedom. Everything is revealed in one contemplation. Mm-hmm. It's like when you are contemplating the light, you simultaneously are contemplating the entire spectrum of the light wave, the light waves of light. So in the contemplation of love, you are contemplating what is the reality. What is it that is real? What is the reality? Is one reality. You can call it love, you call it beauty, you can call it... Love is the manifestation, let's say, of the one reality at the heart level. And beauty is a manifestation of that same reality at the dream level, at the world level, the perceptual realm. So can you want to say something else about your question?
Well, it just occurred as soon as you started talking, it occurred to me, oh, this agape, universal love. I mean, as far as it goes in the Western tradition, I was thinking, what a nice almost remedy that is for for the concern about a me with situations, and and where because that's very divided. But then I realized that my version of agape was, I love everything. I look out at every object and I love it. And then as soon as you started speaking, I realized I got this more, we say you are love. It's not that you are a love director or anything like that.
Yes, it's not that you are loving everything. You are everything. And that is love. So universal love, the truth of universal love, because there's only one universal love, is there is no other, and there is no I, no personal self, no separate self in universal love. So universal love is what I usually say love, for example, one love is very beautiful. It's very, very sweet. We can celebrate love, which is our wholeness, in so many ways. It's so beautiful that we have this waking dream that we can celebrate the love that we are. But it's very rare to have that celebration because of the sense of separation, and therefore the division. The mind is thinking and calculating, measuring, and maneuvering to say, well, blah blah, am I gonna be okay, etc. And so the way we look at universal love from ignorance is we look out and we say, oh, we need to love everything and everybody, but we still are a separate self. The love that I speak of, the one love, the only love there is in the not in looking out, in the contemplation of the reality I experience. I come to the understanding of my seamlessness, of that I am consciousness, and the reality of the I am is consciousness, and that this reality is not personal. Nothing defines it. It defines everything or not, but nothing defines it.
Yes.
That's why the term ultimate or absolute, there isn't a beyond, something that knows it. It is isness. There is a recognition within isness of isness. Isness has within it awareness. So its isness knows itself as isness via awareness, and awareness is knowingness. So isness and knowingness and awareness are the ultimate reality,
Mm-hmm.
which we refer to as consciousness, Satchitananda.
I see. So, in a sort of practical sense, so to speak, this is stay with the contemplation of I am and the basis, and let the rest.
Yes, the contemplation, the reality of consciousness. What is it that is real in your experience?
Mm-hmm.
We contemplate, first of all, is there an external world? Is there an external other?
Mm.
So we look at that, but we don't look at that by thinking about it. We look at our direct experience. So in our direct experience, we experience the external world or the external other.
Mm.
We experience them as perceptions, sensations, or images. Yes?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We don't have any other venue.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine, if we imagine other venue, that's thought, that's imagination,
Mm-hmm.
which is okay, it's a part of our experience. So we know what we refer to as the external world and the other
Mm-hmm.
as perceptions, sensations, thoughts, mentations. And those are, we know them intimately as our very experience. They're not, our perceptions are not outside of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Our sensations and our thoughts are not outside of ourselves. They're intimately ourselves. That's part of the inquiry, part of the contemplation. But if you start your contemplation with, oh, I would like to understand, what love is. I would like to love everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You have overlooked the contemplation of I. You have
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
jumped over a very crucial phase of your inquiry by assuming a me, and you're looking from that vantage point.
Mm-hmm.
You need to take a step back
Mm-hmm.
to, before you look out, to ask yourself, what is the reality of my perception? And by looking at this question, what is the reality of my perception, you are actually looking at what is reality, because there's only one reality. In a way, you are looking at the question, what am I truly? So remain around that. Do not leave that for too long. Come back to that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yes, this thing that you talked about recently about witnessing, witnessing is a word, but having the center, the from behind the head, the awareness, and the heart being bigger than the room. I really like that, and when when we're talking, it almost always jumps into the picture, because it's like a different paradigm or beyond paradigms or something of the usual self-definition, I guess.
Yes, we are habituated to perceive from like as if physical point of perception, which is usually like somewhere around the eyes or the face.
Mm-hmm.
And to break this impression, because it's been so going on for so long, we defocus that point and invite the perception to arise from slightly beyond that focal point. whatever the focus point that you find that you're perceiving from, step behind it and widen your being, because there are no limitation to being.
There's no limitation
to
being.
Beingness. There are no limitations to beingness. There are no limitations to the amness. Not contained. So you allow the amness to expand and to experience from the amness, not from that focal point. So you step slightly behind yourself, about a foot or so behind your head, and you open the rear of your head and the rear of your being, and you envelop and you expand so that the entire perception is from that vantage point, and the entire perception is embraced or is englobed and permeated by from that vantage, from that space. So it's a defocusing of the physical focal point from which you are perceiving.
Yeah, very cool.
So you can just sort of even step back through your head, and behind. At some point, you'll start to get a sense of that. Like, broaden your vision, your face sort of expanding.
And it seems that it has an immediate effect on the thought structures of, like I started with Eros and Philos. they're more known by the localized, operator or something like that.
Right.
Well, that's a beautiful. Thank you.
Okay.
It's pretty much where I expected, but somehow it just brings it more to life when we can talk about these things.
Okay.
Thank you.
So is there any question, anybody?
Magdi?
Yes?
It's Esther here.
Hello, Esther.
Hi.
Hello.
Actually, two things from your words are coming to share. The first has to do with grace. And it feels to me like in the last little while, everything that comes in my path, everything that comes into the flow of this, living experience, whether it be a movie or a word or a friend, it just is becoming so clear to me that every single solitary little thing is grace. And maybe it's like, I've heard of the reflection thing, but that's kind of like what it is. It's reflecting. Everything in my world is reflecting the reality, and it's becoming clear. And the other thing I wanted to share is kind of humorous. All my life, it seems, the mind has told me that there was more expected, and that even in the awakening process and this whole path, it's been like, after all this time, you really don't get it, all these messages. And in the last 2 days, something happened. And looking at those thoughts, something inside of me it just kind of, this inner strength just rose up, and it turned to my mind and it said, how would you know? How would you know? You don't, squat.
Yes.
It was so forceful and so strong in me to turn at those thoughts,
yes,
those collective messages, and just call them on it,
Yes.
How would you know? It made me laugh kind of,
Yeah, very beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing that. This is very beautiful.
Thank you.
Yes, thoughts are known. They arise like clouds. They arise, and they don't know anything. They are known. What is perceived is not knowing. Knowingness belongs beyond what is perceived. When we imagine that what is perceived, thoughts, sensations, when we believe that they are speaking something about us as if they know anything about us, then we're like, oh my God, I hope the thought is saying something good about me. I hope I hope bodily sensation, the feeling is good today. Oh, God, please make it that the thoughts love me. It is humorous, yes. I share your humor, and it's nice to see that, because there is freedom in understanding. When we see that the Santa Claus is actually the neighbor that is putting on the red coat and the white beard, in that moment, laugh. Well, except if we were hoping that you will bring us some gifts, and yeah, really, thank you for sharing, Esther. That's very lovely.
Yeah, I really saw that realization was such an enormous grace, really enormous.
Yes, you are that grace.
Yeah, thank you.
You are that, and you are the infinite, invisible self. That is God's grace. God's grace. I am is God's grace. The I is God's grace. And the whole spiritual inquiry, call it spiritual inquiry, whatever the words, is about knowing thyself, knowing thy true self, not the stories that thought says, oh, this and that, and you this and you're good today and bad tomorrow. No, not that. Knowing thyself is knowing thyself. Absolutely. I know myself as that is not defined, that has no beginning and no end, because a thought begins and ends. A feeling, an emotion, a sensation has a beginning and an ending. It has a cause. It has a trigger. But the I has no cause, no trigger, is not in that realm. There is the realm of thoughts and sensations and meditations and perceptions. But the realm of being is not at all in that realm. It is not a state. It is beyond states. That is the reality of consciousness, that I am. The I am is universal I am. When I say I am, I'm never referring to Magdi or some body. I'm referring to the reality of being. We all know I am. But we have been habituated to take our lead from the thoughts and the feelings. And behind the thoughts and the feelings, there is the belief that the I am is some body, some cluster of thoughts and sensations. But this cluster of thoughts and sensations is just this current thought, this current sensation, a passing dream. No dream defines me. I am not defined by my dream. Thank you for sharing, Esther.
Thank you.
Chris, hello, Chris. You're right. Why doesn't the knowledge I am whole and complete, unlimited awareness stick in the mind? Meanwhile, the idea I am limited is easily stuck. Yes. Good question, Chris. Because the I am whole and complete, that I am awareness, is not a thought. that can stick in the mind. It's not just some partial understanding that we sort of have understood and we have to hold on to this understanding. Like I was saying before, like when you realize Santa Claus is just your neighbor or your dad dressing up as Santa Claus, in that moment, your mind is completely, that structure in your mind that says Santa Claus is real dissolves. So it's a certain type of understanding. It is not just a conceptual understanding. So there is a depth of understanding, and it may be in bits and pieces, Chris. It may not just happen all in one download or in one dissolution. It may be like sometimes you may have a castle of sticks, and you take off one stick and the other stick, and the castle is still holding. It's becoming less and less stable, but it's still sort of holding. But at some point, you remove that one last stick, and the whole structure that was there collapse, and there is no more structure. It's a little bit like that. So it is not so important to know the answer to your question. Why doesn't the understanding that I am consciousness, why doesn't it stick? And why does I am a man or I'm a woman stick? Who cares why? What matters is for you to come to the understanding, to be clear about the path that will free you from that impression, that sense of limitation, and all the angst that comes with that. That's what really matters, is that you find the path. It's not, enough to read about, how come or why did what is the history of the discovery of the West Coast or California. What matters is that you get the map of how to go to California, and you travel the path. But since you asked, we are habituated to refer to the senses as our guide. And we refer to the senses via the perceptions, the sensation, the mentation, with an assumed personal director, personal doer that is doing, that is a personal consciousness that is perceiving. We are habituated, there is a habit to perceive from that assumption without looking at that assumption. So since we look at our assumption, at this assumption, that's what we do in satsang, we look at that assumption, wait a minute, is there actually a personal doer? The looking at this assumption, at this questioning, inquiring into that belief, into that feeling, is for many of us hasn't established itself yet. In other words, we are interested, we look, but then we get distracted back by the world and by the body and by the mind, and we forget our inquiry. So as our inquiry moves from being an interest to being a love and a passion, I really want to know. I cannot live without knowing what is the reality of being. I cannot, that's my purpose, that's my function in life, that's what I need to get to. Until it gets to that stage, you will still find yourself occasionally recollecting that you are consciousness, but going back to, oh yeah, I am this person, I am this man, I am this woman, I am the personal self. So meeting in satsang, contemplating, making time in your life to contemplate, what am I truly? To contemplate the scriptures, to contemplate the teachings of the sages, to trust that recognition within you. Sometimes you hear something and it triggers a recognition, a deep recognition within you. You have to attune yourself to that, and whenever there is that inner recognition, not at the mind level, at the heart level, honor that. Look at that, recall that, look in that direction. Live, apply in whatever way you can live the teaching in whatever way you can, without judgment. Don't judge yourself if you fail or succeed. All that is mind. No, there is no failure and success. There is love of truth at different degrees. At one extreme, love of truth is very, 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 very dim. At another end, it's really burning. This entire experience that you're having, what is its reality? What is it about? This sort of question cannot be answered by the mind, but it can be answered by bringing the question up within yourself, and by being watchful not to accept any answer that comes from the mind, because the mind repeats. And also in your life, it's important that you make some changes in your life that invite more contemplation and to remind you of the contemplation, and not so much distraction in the world, body, mind. Chris, you're right. In Vedanta, they say that purifying the mind is essential. What do you say to that? When you say mind, what are you referring to? It's a good question. So I don't know. So I ask myself, what is mind? In my experience. Because if you go to the encyclopedias and to the Vedantic teachings and You may find many definitions, but I also have my experience. I say, what is mind in my experience? In this very moment, you could say that there is this perception. There may be some bodily sensation. There may be some thought. So I refer to that as mind. In my teaching, I refer to that as mind. But in fact, there is no mind as such. There isn't like something out there somewhere called a mind that I'm going to purify. There's just this perception, for example. That's real. So I tell myself, okay, what is it to purify this perception? Now, I don't use the term purifying the mind, but now that you have introduced this term, I would say the following about it. That the purifying the mind is looking right now at this perception or this sensation and asking myself, what is its reality? What is it? Is there a separate observer? Is there somebody outside of this perception that can purify it? What is it that is outside of this perception? Is this perception standing out there somewhere and I'm here somewhere else and I'm going to purify it? Or is there an intimacy? This perception and the perceiver, the perceived and the perceiver aren't separate. There are not two. But coming back to the term purification, again, I don't use that term, but I'm using it now, is the inquiry into, is there a separate me? Is there a separate self? Because in thoughts and in perceptions and in sensations, there is an assumed me. There is the assumption that I is a man, or in whoever case, I'm a person. And that this person is a limited self. And so I look at that question and I ask myself, where in my experience is there a separate self? In my experience, there's only thoughts, perceptions, and sensations, and they're intimate. They come and go. They're intimate with consciousness. There is consciousness. And consciousness, awareness, beingness is what we refer to as I. So the purification of the mind, using your term, is the inquiry into what am I truly? Is there a separate me? Which is very different from I have a mind, and if I can purify the mind, then my mind will become pure and I'll be closer to God. You'll go nowhere with that, because you still are a me, a separate self, purifying your personal mind. And of course, if you're a great, great sage, then you'll be purifying everybody else's mind, which is still ignorance. So the inquiry is into what is this separate me? Is there a separate me? In your experience, you don't need to go anywhere, Chris. It's everything is revealed to you. You are yourself. So you ask yourself, what is this I? You don't need to go to anybody. You don't need to. You just ask yourself, what is this I in my true experience, in my real experience, which is right now? Am I the thoughts that are appearing to me? Am I the images that appear to me? Am I the bodily sensations that appear to me? Am I the perceptions that appear to me? Or am I the screen upon which all these perceptions appear? Am I what appears, or am I the consciousness or the knowingness of what appears? That would be the path of purification. Again, please, I'm just using the term purification like that, just because it's brought up, just to remain in the conversation with you, but around that term. But I don't use the term purification because it is an assumption in this term that there is some impurity and that there is somebody that can fix some impurity. Let's get rid of the impurities. This is a separate thought, separate thinking, separative thinking. That is not what I would recommend. But continue your inquiry into what is the reality of your experience and what is the reality of I. Chris, you write, discrimination is a form of purification. There is a discrimination that arises in your inquiry whereby you start to recognize that you are not your thoughts, you are not your sensations, you are not this separate I, that you are consciousness. So that's a discrimination. And you start to notice the identification when it arises, its whole the stormy character of it. You start to sense that, and that's also a discrimination. It's a discrimination that comes with perception. Thank you, Hepti. You're right, Chris. The way I do it is whatever appears is not me, because awareness is not an object. Yes, Chris. So what you are referring to, that whatever appears is not you, that's referred to as the neti, that I am awareness and I'm not that appears. It's an important sadhana. It's an important practice in discrimination, that I am not what appears. But just since you're bringing it up, I just want to mention to you that neti, I am not what appears, is part of the contemplation. The other part of the contemplation, which is very crucial, is what am I truly? So I am consciousness, awareness, and then your inquiry is into what is this awareness? How old is it? Where is it born? What is its size? What is its where does it start? Where does it end? So there is a contemplation into the qualities of consciousness. That's a very important next step in your contemplation. And of course, finally, I'm saying them like steps, but they can be done simultaneously. There is the living as consciousness. So you live as consciousness, because when you live as consciousness, all sorts of vasanas are going to start to be released. If you don't live as consciousness, then the vasanas remain latent and dormant in your being, and you will not experience Satchitananda. You will not, the wheel of samsara will continue to spin. So there is the neti-neti, there is the contemplation of the qualities of consciousness, there is living as consciousness, and of course, there is God's grace. Thank you for your question, Chris. Okay, I have a couple of questions that have been sent to me, and I would like to take some time. Well, I don't have much time, but some time to. So Shivaram, hello, Shiva. So you're right, dear Magdi, this just appeared while listening to last Sunday's satsang. Would you let it go through you, please, and maybe comment on it in today's satsang? One love, Shivaram. So you're right, Shiva. The world does not exist as an independent reality. The fact that my senses perceive what is called an object, I'm not sure what to do about that. Yeah, there is a, yeah. Okay. Tara, let me know if this has changed. Okay, let me know if this changed. Yes? No? Any changes? No. Okay. Okay. Just dealing with a little technical issue here. Okay. Okay. Question to people here: Are you perceiving me on your screen? Are you seeing me on your screen? Yeah, yes. Okay. There was an issue with the screen. Okay. Thanks. So let me go back to Shivaram. You're right. The world does not exist as an independent reality. The fact that my senses perceive what is called an object does not prove its independent reality. Okay. Shiva, before I go on any further with your question, let me just address that one sentence. You're right, the fact that my senses perceived what is called an object. Now, the senses is not what perceives, okay? So it's always consciousness that's perceiving. So that's, you could say, perceiving the world via the senses, yeah? But the perceiver in chief, there's only one perceiver, and that's consciousness, not the senses. So the fact that, I'm going to sort of correct it a little bit, the fact that consciousness perceived what is called an object via my senses does not prove its independent reality. No, yes, it does not prove any independent reality. First, in terms of reality, there is only one reality. There isn't a dependent and an independent reality. You could say that your dreams, your night dreams, depend on you, the dreamer. But the reality, the fact that your night dream depend on you, does not mean that they have an independent reality. Still, the reality of your night dream and your waking dream is the dreamer. There's only one reality. So the fact that there is dependence does not imply independent realities. I'm going to continue with your question. There is only one consciousness in which I, as the body-mind, the person, and the world both appear. Okay, Shiva here, I would like to make this just a little note that what appears is never a person. The person is is an add-on. It's an extrapolation. It's a conceptualization. It's not what appears. What appears, we could say that what appears are perceptions, sensations, and thoughts, meditations. But even that is only a pedagogical tool. Even to speak that way is only to speak that way metaphorically, because in speaking that way, there may be the impression that in fact there is such a thing as a thought, there is such a thing as a perception, there is such a thing as a sensation, while in fact there is no such thing. There is only consciousness. But until we are at the end of all our questions, teachers speak in metaphorically and use these pedagogical tools to make certain points and to make certain clarifications. So having said that, I would then say that there are perceptions, thoughts, and sensations, but when you search for the person, you will not find one. You will not find a person outside of the thought, which says it's a person, or a perception that has a thought and says that's a person. So you will not find an actual person, but you will always find consciousness. So coming back to what you said, what you sent, you say, I am consciousness aware of itself and as itself. Yes, beyond and simultaneously immanent in all appearances. Yes, so still you're right. We live in this dream called time, in which we seem to appear and disappear, and the world with us. Within that dream, we can radiocarbon date an object and say that was created 2,000 years ago, or that a mountain was created 200,000 years ago, which seems to confirm the independent existence of the world. Yet this seeming confirmation refers only to us as mortal body-mind structures in relationship to the 2,000-year-old object. It is therefore a dream confirmation. I'm going to proceed slowly, step by step here with some of what you wrote. So you say we live in this dream called time, in which we seem to appear and disappear in the world with us. One could say that, Shivaram, from the unexamined assumption, or still from the belief that I am a body-mind, that I am a form. In fact, in your experience, you do not live in this dream called time. We could say that the dream called time appears to you, or in you, or within you, and it does not come from some other galaxies and then goes right into you. No, it actually even arises from within you. So it arises, the impression of time, because the impression of time is thought, right? Because, for example, the thought that we were visiting together a few days ago, which was very lovely, that thought creates impression of time. So there is an image, right? In the absence of this image, in the absence of of thought, there is no time. So there is no impression of time, because time is a thought impression. So the thought impression arises from where? It arises out of consciousness and dissolves in consciousness. There is no other reality. So all what appears to you, out of you, and dissolves back into you. So the impression of time, the dream called time, you do not live in it. You've never lived in it, Shivaram. It's always been an impression, a mind impression. And when you were living in it there was a belief structure and a feeling structure, then there was a feeling of unhappiness, because when we live in a certain condition, that means we have been reduced from the vastness of being to some limited form. So you say we can radiocarbon date objects 2,000 years ago and some 200,000 years ago. And then you say this seems to confirm the independent quality of the world. No. No. The radiocarboning only relates to the dream. So there are relationships in the dream. For example, you may in your night dream that you have traveled somewhere, had all sorts of relationships, and then you left those places and traveled somewhere else, and then 10 years later you receive a letter from your friends that you visited 10 years ago, and the date on the letter is from 10 years ago. You saved the letter, and then at some point you sit down, you look at the letters, you say, well, here's a letter that was dated, in 1982. Here's another one, 1996, and here's a letter I received, 2 days ago. That proves that there is an independent reality. But what you are overlooking, and what the entire scientific world is overlooking, is that what they are studying is the phenomenal world, meaning the dream world, and there is an impression that there is an actual, dream world reality, only because we have not yet realized the one reality, which is the reality of consciousness. So in fact, you could say that the scientific studies, the research at the scientific mind level still has in it an assumption that there is a physical reality. And because that assumption hasn't yet been focused on, we have to assume some external reality and study it. This is what we do in science. Of course, there is a certain part of science that is actually questioning what is the reality of the world, and that we're searching for matter, which we haven't found yet. But overall, as a general statement, in science there is an assumption there is a physical reality, and because there is an assumption that there is a physical reality, we're finding evidence that supports that, like the assumption that my night dreams are real. Then when I save those letters that are dated, that have a certain date to them, that proves in the dream that there is an independent reality to those dream characters. So this impression of independent reality will remain until you realize that in fact that is just the dream waves, dream. That's the dream. That's how the dream is playing itself. Reality because if there is a world that exists, it has to be real. It has to have a reality. Because if it did not, then what are we talking about? So let's assume that there is a real world out there. Now, we know in our experience that consciousness is real. And that's established. We need to be clear about that. Now, when we look at the reality of the world out there, say, okay, that reality that the world has out there has to have some connection with the reality of consciousness, because there's only one reality. Because if there were two realities, separate realities, independent realities, what would know that? Something has to somehow, there has to be a higher reality that knows both realities, that can say, well, there are two sub-realities, but it still refers to one reality. So if there are like two separate realities, two independent realities, they have to somehow can be connected, because the world is known via consciousness. So that there is already a connection that we cannot deny. But given that there is one reality, then that independent world that of 200 million years ago or 20 million years ago, and the reality of that world and the reality of consciousness there has to be one. Now, so this may not bring complete satisfaction to just understand that. So we contemplate then. We contemplate, well, okay, well, the world, it changes. I mean, carbon dating proves it. Consciousness does not change. So I have here at hand something that is unchanging. I can study that. Because if I'm trying to study a shifting target, it's going to drive me crazy. So I say, okay, well, let me just study consciousness, because I've got it right there, and it's not changing. It's not aging. It has no carbon dating. And it's closer than close. I don't have to go dig for rocks in Manchuria or whatever, or in the Jordan Valley to carbon date whatever. I can just look, carbon date consciousness right here and there. So I asked myself, well, what is the age of consciousness? Because I'm looking at carbon dating. So what is the age of consciousness? I find no age. What is the cause of consciousness? I find no cause. It has no pieces to it. I can't say, I cannot take a piece of consciousness and say, well, that part is is subject A and that part is subject B. Let me see how they relate. That's completely. So anyways, once I investigate consciousness and its agents, and I find that it's fully revealed, as it's self-revealing. It is self. It has all the questions and all the answers as one. At the same time, there are no questions and no answers. So, and then this consciousness is the reality of consciousness, is what we refer to as I. I am, when you say I am conscious, I am consciousness, that says it all. So I'm not sure if I've wandered far away from your question. So the inquiry is always into the reality of your experience, the reality of consciousness. Because studying the reality of the world is like studying the reality of your night dreams, because it keeps changing. Your night dreams keeps changing, and your waking dream keeps changing. And when you go to study in your night dream the age of the pink flying elephant that appears in your dreams, you come out empty-handed. No, I'm not hearing you, Shiva. Let me see. One moment. No, you're not muted, so I should be able to hear you, but I'm not hearing you. If you go up, if you move the cursor to the upper part of your screen, there should be a little icon that has a mic. You turned it on? Okay. It could be then what I would go to the settings, maybe not now or later. You can go to the settings of your. Is anybody hearing Shivaram? Ananda, were you hearing?
No, I can't hear him. Can
Okay.
you hear me?
No, I hear you, but I cannot hear him. So, but tu m'entends, oui? Shivaram, you are hearing me, yes? Okay. So go to your settings, maybe not now or later, and go to sounds, and there must be something that is muted in your settings, and you'll be able to unmute yourself there, okay? So I wanted to just go to, okay, Shivaram. Ananda, you're right. It seems there is a major difference between appearances and impressions. Can you say some more?
Well, you talk about the me impression or the impression of time, for example, and those seem to be appearances or perceptions plus some kind of an established way of relative way of looking, you know, like a paradigm of separate me or something like that. In other words, if something just appears, like you appear to see a news story about carbon dating and dinosaurs, that can appear whether you're confused about reality or not. But the impression that that's actually the case.
Okay. All right, I got you. Just to clarify, I used the term appearances and impressions sort of synonymously. I do in my sharing, so to clarify that. And I use the term ignorance to refer to not just an appearance, but a belief that I am a separate self. Just to clarify, when you hear me speaking about an appearance or a mind impression would be a thought. It's also a perception is a mind impression, and a bodily sensation is also a mind impression. It's all, I refer to all of that as mind. I don't follow the classic definition of simply talking about thoughts as mind. I include in the term mind perceptions and sensations.
So if something is an appearance, it arises to someone, and that makes it invalid, so to speak.
Well, you know, yes, when by appearance you are referring to a separate observer, you are talking about ignorance, because a separate observer is an assumption. There are no
Yes.
Is no validity to this assumption. There is no proof of that. It's just strictly a belief structure.
But if you and I are looking at each other and there's an appearance, two-way, the same consciousness is seeing appearances, something like that.
Yes. So you are perceiving yourself.
Yes.
Because that appearance is not separate from yourself.
So then what else would you call it? What else would you call seeing a news story about carbon dating, for example? I'm calling it saying, what
in your experience, you're only experiencing thoughts, perceptions, and sensations. What do you need to call it? I mean, we call them already thoughts, perceptions, and sensations. But what matters is to understand and experientially that whether it's a thought or a perception or a sensation, what I refer to as an appearance, that this appearance is at zero distance from its own knowingness. In other words, the knowingness of the appearance and the appearance are one. There isn't a separate entity that is perceiving a separate appearance. I and the appearance are one. So once there is that understanding, and of course a living understanding, who cares? You call it appearance, you don't call it anything, because it's all consciousness.
Well then, okay, in that case, you might as well call it an impression, because it's still...
They're all impressions. So all
perceptions,
appearances and sensations are impressions and mind impressions. When I speak of mind impressions, I'm speaking of all of them, of thoughts, perceptions, and sensations.
Okay, well then when a realized person talks about, oh, I went for a walk and there was a beautiful beech tree. What's going on? Because
nothing, the rishi is the mind is freed. It has died.
Yes.
And it's freed. So you can see a beautiful beech tree. Oh, had a really beautiful lunch. Nice salad with. What is the key thing to understand is it's not about what you perceive. It's a silent transformation. It's not that suddenly you stop perceiving.
Right.
Is the sense of separation, the feeling of separation, and all the angst that is there is gone. I know there are some people who say, oh, well, you use the term I, and so you must be still in ignorance because you use the term I. And there are some people who even try not to use the term I.
I know. I'm not trying to go there, but the people like as a conventionality, it seems like almost everybody says, well, this is what's appearing or something like that. This is what's coming up on the screen or whatever. But I think it seems like incomprehensibly profound what you're saying is there's still no appearance if there's no separate one for it to appear to. So it's actually myself just in its
Yes. This contemplation is about knowing your true nature, which is causeless peace and happiness. So at the body level, it's transparency. At the mind level, it's peace and tranquility, and clarity and wisdom.
Mhm.
And at the world level, it's beauty and celebration. And at the heart level, it's love. Knowing yourself reveals these qualities and releases all the veils, dissolves all the veils that all the structures, the veils that
Mm,
stood in the way.
mm, mm. It's almost like there's some kind of a ray gun that tries to create an external reality. The beauty tries to be something out there to the mind, but it's not true. It's not true that it's actually out there. If I understand.
The mind becomes like the vast ocean, like the sky, like the
Mm,
infinite sky.
mhm,
There's peace, undisturbed, no disturbance.
mm,
There is no more trying or there's no efforting. There are no concerns. Nothing like that is.
mm, mm,
And there is a stillness of being and the silent source of being. It's a silent understanding in the absence of mind. It's an understanding that God recognizing itself.
mhm.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry. We'll pick up the questions, that remain next time. I thank you very much for your love and your friendship, and so beautiful to be together. So namaste, and we see you soon. Yeah.